The desert does not forgive weakness, and it does not reward kindness at least that's what Caleb Mercer believed. After 30 lonely years, on his ranch near the red cliffs of Arizona, the land was cracked like old leather, the wind sharp with dust and memories, and the sun merciless to men who had already lost too much. Caleb had buried his wife under a mesquite tree, his son under silence, and his faith somewhere between the dry riverbed and the empty horizon. He lived alone now, surviving by habit rather than hope. Until the evening, he saw something impossible walking out of the heat. She was enormous, taller than any man he had ever seen, her silhouette cutting against the dying sun like a myth made flesh. Long black hair flowed down her back, her skin marked with ash and blood, her shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of war. She walked barefoot across the burning sand, yet her steps were steady, proud, unbroken. Caleb reached for his rifle by instinct, his heart pounding like a drum of warning, but something stopped him. The woman swayed, staggered, and fell to her knees only 20 yards from his well. Apache. Every story he had ever heard screamed danger. Giant Apache women were spoken of in whispers, warriors, protectors, spirits of vengeance. Men said they crushed enemies with their bare hands and drank courage. From the earth itself, Caleb stood frozen as she collapsed face first into the dust, her breath shallow, her lips cracked and bleeding. She was dying of thirst. He could have turned away. Many would have. The desert taught men to mind their own survival. But Caleb remembered a time when someone had once given him water when he had nothing left. He remembered mercy. Slowly, carefully, he lifted the bucket from the well and approached her. Up close, she was even more terrifying. Muscles like carved stone, scars crossing her arms and neck, eyes closed but fierce even in sleep. He knelt and tilted the water to her lips. At first, nothing happened. Then she drank, deeply, desperately, her hand suddenly gripping his wrist with startling strength. Caleb did not pull away. Her eyes opened, black, sharp, ancient. They locked onto his, and for one endless second, Caleb was certain he had just signed his own death warrant. But then, something unexpected happened. The grip loosened. She released his wrist, and she spoke, her voice low, rough, yet calm. "Why?" Caleb swallowed. "Because you were dying." She studied him as if weighing his soul. Then, without another word, she stood. Towering over him, she nodded once, turned, and walked back into the desert night. No threat, no thanks, just the wind swallowing her footsteps. Caleb did not sleep that night. At dawn, the ground began to shake. Hooves, hundreds of them. He stepped onto his porch, shotgun in hand, heart hammering, and saw the horizon moving. 300 Apache warriors surrounded his ranch in a silent, perfect circle, painted faces, raised spears, bows drawn, rifles gleaming. Not be weighed on a scale, and that if this was how he died, then at least death would find him honest. Through the night, he watched her fever fight and fall like waves against a cliff, her body shuddering, his own breath growing weaker. And more than once, he thought they might both be dead by dawn. Yet somewhere between the pain and the prayers, he felt something else too, a strange peace, as if the land itself had paused to watch. And when the first thin line of sunlight crept across the floor, the girl finally slept, her breathing steady, her color returning, while the rancher collapsed into a chair beside the bed, smiling faintly, knowing he had given away the last thing keeping him alive, and believing, truly believing, that this would be his final sunrise. If this story already has your heart, if you believe that one act of kindness can echo louder than a lifetime of mistakes, then stay with us, subscribe to the channel, because what happens next, what arrives at his bedside the next morning, will change everything he thought. He knew about life, death, and the spirits that watch us all. Morning did not arrive gently. It came with a strange stillness that pressed against the ranch house like a held breath. And when the old rancher opened his eyes, he was surprised to find himself still alive, his chest aching fiercely, his vision blurred. Yet the sunlight spilling through the window felt warmer than it ever had before, almost purposeful, and for a brief moment he wondered if death had already claimed him and this was some quiet afterworld. But then he heard soft footsteps on the wooden floor that did not belong to the girl. Footsteps slow, deliberate, carrying a weight older than the house itself. And when he turned his head, he saw a figure standing near the foot of the bed. Tall and wrapped in dark woven cloth, silver hair braided down his back, eyes deep and calm like still water hiding unfathomable depth. And before fear could rise, the rancher knew, in the way a man knows truth without needing proof, that this was a shaman, one of the old ones spoken of in whispers, a keeper of stories, bones, and breath. And the girl now sat upright beside him, no longer weak, no longer burning with fever, her eyes clear and steady as she looked at the rancher with something like reverence mixed with sorrow. The shaman spoke then, his voice low but carrying through the room, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen, telling the rancher that the land had been watching him for many years, watching his choices, his silences, his regrets, and that the night before had been a turning point, written into the dust long before either of them were born, for the girl was his granddaughter, sent by fate, not by chance, poisoned while gathering roots meant to save another, and guided by the spirits to the one door that would open when all others would close. And as the shaman spoke, he revealed that the medicine the rancher gave was not just a cure for the girl, but a test of the heart, because true medicine was not measured in bottles, but in sacrifice. And when the rancher tried to speak, to apologize for a lifetime of wrongs, the shaman raised a hand gently and told him that apologies spoken at the edge of death carry weight only when matched by action, and that his action had already been heard. The shaman then knelt beside the bed, placing a bundle of feathers, herbs, and bone over the rancher's chest, chanting softly in a language older than fences, older than borders, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and into the earth beneath the house. And as the chant rose and fell, the rancher felt something loosen inside him, something cold and tight that had lived in his lungs and blood for years. And he gasped as air filled him more deeply than it had in decades, pain retreating like a tide pulled by unseen hands, while outside the wind picked up, circling the house as if sealing a promise. The shaman told him then that the land remembers those who choose mercy, when no reward is promised, that spirits walk close to those who give even when they have nothing left, and that while death had been ready for him, it had stepped aside, not erased, not defeated, but delayed because the balance had shifted, and the rancher would live not forever, but long enough to set right what he could, to listen, to learn, to return water to dry places and silence to wounded ground. And tears streamed down the old man's face as he realized this second chance was heavier than any punishment he had feared, because it required living differently, loving differently. And before the shaman left, he placed a hand on the rancher's forehead and said that the girl would come back one day to tell the full story. But until then, the rancher must remember this morning whenever doubt returned. And with that, the shaman and the girl stepped outside into the light and were gone, leaving behind only the scent of sage and the sound of birds returning to the land as if they had been waiting for permission. The rancher lay there long after, breathing steadily, staring at the ceiling, knowing that this story, this single act of giving when it cost everything, had changed the course of his life and perhaps the land itself. And if you've stayed with this story until now, if you believe that kindness can summon miracles and that mercy can call even the spirits to your bedside, then subscribe to this channel, because stories like this are not just told to be heard. They are told to remind us who we still have time to become.